Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So today I'm going to work on some pieces that I've been anxiously waiting to get to. Now I've been working on kits, but I had a few things that just needed some little updates and repairs, and I have more than one item, so let me just get right to it. Now this lovely unique table was gifted to me by my precious doll Carol K. It's actually a table that turns into a chair. Isn't that clever? So I really just need to stain it and add the hardware. And she did such a lovely job sanding and assembling the piece, I don't even see any glue spills. So I want to be really, really careful and respectful about how I finish it. Now, dolls, I have made it a habit, and I always recommend that you stain your pieces before you assemble them. But it's clear to see that Carol is an experienced miniaturist because I don't see any places where the glue oozed out. So Carol, I'm aspiring to be like you when I grow up, where I don't show any glue spillage in my kit assembly. Now, when you're staining a piece that's already assembled, you want to be careful to make sure you don't miss anything, get all the little corners, and you want to take the time to put on even coats so that the coverage will be as uniform as possible. Now, I must admit, when I'm staining a piece, I'm normally a little bit haphazard, but today is something about this piece that makes me want to be a little bit more mindful and careful about how I apply my coats. Because although I like a lot of my things to look weathered and worn, I don't want the initial application of the stain to look as though it was done without care. And now that this beautiful table chair is looking really, really nice, I'm going to set it aside and allow it to dry. So come on, let me go show you what else I did. Now here's another piece that was gifted to me recently. Now it had already been built and stained by someone else, but they gave it to me as a challenge to see what I could do with it. And I've hereby accepted the challenge. Now there was some additional hardware and I put that aside. And you can clearly see from this angle that the doors were installed, but they were installed upside down. So I'm going to go ahead and remove them, and I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to replace them or possibly just use the cabinet without the doors and add the doors to something else. Now at first I thought it was going to be difficult to remove the door, but it was actually added with just a very small pin. So with a slight tug, I was able to remove it very easily. Now, in instances like this, when you're removing a door or the door gets broken when you remove it, you may have to repair the wood. And I'm going to show you how to do that as well. But I've just removed the pin on both the top and the bottom of the door. Now, anytime you find spare pins like that, dolls, do not throw them away. They're excellent to salvage to use for another project. Now here I am adding acetone to dissolve the glue that's around the hardware, like the knobs and the drawer pulls. Now, dolls, you do want to make sure you're working in a well-ventilated area because I am using quite a few chemicals today. Now again, I'm primarily using acetone to dissolve the glue that's around the hardware, and you see I'm using my little dropper to concentrate it in those areas specifically. Now after I allowed the acetone to sit for a little while, I realized I didn't put enough, so I added a little bit more to allow it to saturate those areas that had all the glue around them. I'm gently pushing away some of the old glue and stain to just clean up around the handles. Now, dolls, I'm not going to show this entire process because it did take quite a while, but I really just wanted to share what type of things you would use to work on a project like this, because you don't want to destroy or damage the hardware and you don't want to tear up the door. And some may wonder why I'm going through all this trouble for two little pieces of furniture. And I guess I really have a thing for renovating or salvaging things. I just always look at things that may look like something that someone else would throw away. For some reason, I always see a deeper value. And although the assembly of these pieces is solid, the finishing needs some updates. And although these two pieces present a few challenges, I see an opportunity to create something precious and treasured. And although it was quite tedious trying to remove all that lacquer and stain from all the hardware, I was really happy with it because it gave me hope that there was something really beautiful underneath. Now, dolls, although I didn't show it, after I removed all the stain and glue from around the hardware, I used lacquer thinner to remove that layer of stain and lacquer on the body of the pieces. And this is what I was left with. Now, dolls, I wasn't altogether sure what I wanted to do with the little cabinet, but I for sure didn't want it to be brown. So I gave it a couple coats of this light green paint. Now, if you like the shade, it's actually called Succulent by Folk Art. And it's a very versatile shade that works really well with a lot of minis. Now, although I added more than one coat, I didn't want it to be solid and opaque. I wanted it to be a little bit thin and streaky. So a semi-dry brush worked well. Now, this chest was included in a lot that I purchased off eBay, and it came without legs in the front. Now, this is really a beautiful piece, really finely made and finished, so I really wanted to add something special. So I chose cabriole legs for the front. At first, I thought maybe the legs were broken off, but if I remember correctly in the description on eBay, this item was a part of an estate sale that wasn't completed by the original artist. So while I was trying to determine how to add the legs, I realized there was a slight difference between the ones that were existing and the ones I wanted to add. So I determined that the simple solution would be to shave it down a little bit so it would match the legs in the back. And I was delighted to realize that this was the perfect opportunity to use my little sanding tool that my precious doll Terry V had given me. Now, after I sanded the legs down so that everything would sit level, it was time for me to go ahead and add the stain. And dolls, I have to tell you that I was thoroughly amused when I realized that the stain I was using on the legs was almost an exact match to the existing body of the chest. It made me feel like it was always meant to be. I mean, dolls, just look at that color. That looks perfect. So at this point, I went on to add my glue, and I carefully aligned it so that it matched the corners of the chest so everything looked uniform. And after I positioned and aligned both legs so that they matched the corners, I allowed it to dry upright, which may not be a best practice, but it is what I did. Now, dolls, I've had this lovely little half round table for quite some time. I do believe I bought it off of Minimum World when I first started my channel, and I never used it. And I had plans to do some other things to it, but today I decided to paint it black. Now, this is a really nice deep matte black, and I'd already done the first coats kind of streaky and sanded a little bit. And now I'm adding paint inside the drawer cavity because I don't want to see any red from the inside. Now here I want to show you I had some really fine sandpaper, and I'm just kind of swiping it across the top to remove a part of that layer of the coat that I put on it. Now I did do a solid coat, but I still wanted it to look a little streaky, not necessarily weathered and worn, but I did want some of the red showing through to give sort of a patina effect. And although I do have the black and the red is showing through, I do want a third color. Now you can see I'm concentrating some of my sanding efforts along the edges and what I consider the high points or the parts that kind of stick out to define the shape of the table. And it seemed like the more that I sanded it and I could see the little streaks and peaks of red, the more I liked it. So I continued. Now make sure if you decide to do something like this, you use the finest sandpaper possible, because if you use something really, really coarse, it's going to tear away at the details of your piece and really distort the look. Now, dolls, since I started to share this little project when it was already in progress, let me show you the color before I started. So here's a quick glance of the drawer that goes to the little table so you can really see how bright the red is or how bright the wood was before I started this project. Now, although I did paint the sides of the drawer, I'm not going to paint the inside or the bottom of the drawer. I think the red on the inside of the drawer gives the impression of a liner, and I think it's a nice little accent. Now that the piece is completely painted and sanded, now I'm thinking about my third layer of color. And the third layer of color that I decided on was gold. Now, I really like that the hardware kind of has a goldish brassy look, but I wanted to add some metallic elements. And I do have these couple pieces of nail art that I'm trying to play around and determine where I want to place it. And in addition to using the nail art as additional hardware for detailing, I'm also going to use some antique gold rub and buff to hit the high points of the piece. Now, those same areas that I rubbed down or sanded, I'm going to add a little bit of the rub and buff to add a little glitz and glamour to this little table. Now, I want you to notice or take note that I'm adding the rub and buff in kind of a rickshaw random type of fashion because I don't want the accents of gold to be perfectly placed. I almost want it to look haphazard. And although I wanted the application of the gold rub and buff to be haphazard, I still wanted there to be a reasonably balanced and even representation of the antique gold rub and buff all over the table. Now, after I was done adding as much rub and buff as I wanted, I went ahead and started adding some of my little nail art pieces. Now, these are pieces that I use on so many things. I've got the little gold studs and some of the little gold circles, but In this case, I wanted to add some of the studs to the legs. Now here is this frame. I'm preparing to add my little nail art pieces to the table as accents. And I didn't want to put the glue directly on the drawer, so I'm just dabbing the little circle into the super glue gel before I place it. Now, dolls, I'm just eyeballing this. I didn't measure anything, just trying to place it in the center between the two handles. And after I got that piece placed, I was really happy with it, but I thought it needed a little something else. And at this point, dolls, I was really starting to get amused because when I started to work on this table, I didn't have a plan at all as to what I wanted it to look like. I just started to play, and the longer I played, the more I could see. So that's why I always want to encourage you, dolls, to sometimes just freestyle and play around with your things and your creativity just to see what you come up with. Now here I am adding a little dot of glue to the center of that piece of nail art because I want to add a larger stud. And I placed it right in the center of the circle, and I really think that added a lot to the drawer. And you can also see in this frame that I've added two little gold studs to the legs as well. And dolls, I like the way this turned out so much that I started thinking about what other pieces of furniture do I have that I could do this to. And suddenly I remembered I had a piece that had that same kind of reddish undertone. Now, this is a little house of miniatures kit that I made probably before I even started the channel, and I painted it that same reddish tone. So I'm starting with the same process of painting the entire thing black. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a couple coats and allow it all to dry solid before I begin to sand it and add the other enhancements. And for this one, I'm not going to show you the entire process, but I will show you the results at the end. Now, dolls, here I am back again with the lovely dresser that I stripped the stain and lacquer from earlier in the video. And I've already painted it that mint green color. And now I'm hitting the highlights with some of my antique gold rub and buff. Now, again, this is a very simple process, and I'm just kind of once overing all the high points of the dresser. And I think an item like this would look really well in a setting where someone is going for the shabby chic look with a little bit of glam. Now here we are back with that table that converts into a chair, and there was a drawer that was right under the seat, but the drawer needed a front to it. Now it's a perfect fit, so there's no need for me to be concerned about that. So I just need to add a front to the drawer and to create a drawer pull. Now, dolls, I found this random scrap among my things. I'm not sure if it's a popsicle stick or just another leftover strip of wood, but it's a perfect size for what I need. Now here you see me just marking the wood so I know exactly where to cut it. And then I just used my miter shears to trim off the excess. Now, as I mentioned, this piece was a scrap, so I went on to trim off the other side to make sure it was even because it looked like it was cut kind of crooked. Now that I've trimmed the piece down to the appropriate size to be the front of my drawer, I do need to finish it a little bit because the cut was kind of jagged. So I've got a super fine piece of sandpaper and I'm dragging the little piece of wood along it on the edge. Now I started by creating this kind of beveled effect on both ends. And as I continued, I realized I wanted it actually on all four sides. So I did it on both ends and both of the long sides to kind of round it. So you're dragging it away from yourself. And it turned out really nice because it made it really smooth and made everything look finished. Now that all the sides of my little drawer front are all nice and smooth, I'm just trying it out on the end of the drawer to see if it's looking the way I want it to look, and it is. So I'm really happy with it, so I need to go ahead and stain it. So dolls, when it comes to staining my items, I don't always use best practices because you should actually remove a little bit of your stain into a smaller container to keep the major part of the pot uncontaminated. Yeah, but that's not what I do. I use it directly out of the tin, and the bottom of it gets a lot of sediment, and it, like I said, it's really, really dark. And I dipped the brush in and pulled out a big glob of a really dark part of the stain, which left a really dark spot on my wood. So now you see me here trying to lighten that dark spot, sanding it and wiping it off, and I actually ended up using a little lacquer thinner to lift the dark deposit of stain. And although I ended up doing a lot of unnecessary work, I prevailed in the end, and I was able to remove enough of that dark stained spot to make everything match and look uniform so I could add it to the front of my drawer. And after I lightened the spot, I stained it all over and then sanded it again to make sure everything was smooth. and it turned out the perfect color. So now I'm going to go ahead and add glue and glue it to the front of the actual drawer. I had to be mindful that when I added it to the front of the drawer that I centered everything so that I had even borders on both sides. Now while that's drying, let me go ahead and find a drawer pull. Now I found a tiny drawer pull that was left over from some other previous project, and it turned out to be perfect for this one. So after placing it where I wanted it, it had a hole in the middle, so I used my awl to create sort of like a starter hole so I would know exactly where to drill it to add the brass pin. Now after I created my starter hole, I put a teeny tiny half of a dot of glue over the hole, and then I placed my tiny piece of hardware right on top of that dot. Now, while the little plate was drying, I grabbed my brass pin and trimmed off the point and dipped the end of it into the super glue as well. And when I placed it right into the hole, I gently pressed it so that the super glue would go down into the hole and secure the pin on the inside. I apologize, dolls, that this part of the footage is a little bit blurry, but let me show you what it looked like in the end. And here is my tiny drawer pull. It's already been installed and it's ready to go. Everything is dry, so let's go ahead and see how it works in the chair. And there it is. It fits nice and neat. It doesn't protrude out. And I'm happy that it turned out nice because I didn't have the drawer front, so I had to create my own, but I think it blends in well to make it look as though it was a part of the original design. So dolls, I'm bringing back the little hutch that we started out with in the beginning, and I have to be quite honest, it didn't turn out the way I originally had wished, and so I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board on it. I'm really happy with the way the dresser turned out, so I'll bring the hutch back in a follow-up video. Now, I definitely will have to follow up on this one, that although I added the legs, I do need to add the drawer pulls, but I just had to pull the drawers out so you can see how lovely this was and how finely it was made. Yeah, this was definitely an artisan piece. It does not feel like a kit. And oh, there are the lovely legs that I added. And here's a quick review of the other pieces I completed. All together, everything is dry, and I'm really tickled about the way everything turned out. Now, dolls, if you enjoyed this video today and want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe, and always look for me on Mondays after 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And make sure you hit your notification bell so you'll be alerted anytime I upload a video. Now, dolls, for those of you all who don't know, Little Gretchen's Workshop now has an eBay store. Now, some of the items in this video will be available for purchase. Most of my items are one of a kind, so shop early for best selection. So really quick, I want to give a warm welcome to all my new subscribers. And also I want to say thank you to all those of you who have already purchased from my store. I'm really glad you found something that you could add to your personal collection. So let me get back to my table and finish up these other projects. And until next time, I'm looking forward to seeing you all right here on Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.